Good morning, everyone. I would like to call this Operations Planning Committee meeting to order at 9:05 p.m. on May 11th. First item on the agenda is the approval of the prior meeting minutes. So may I, first, are there any additions, subtractions, deletions for the March 9th, 2022 minutes? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second? Jim Palin, all in favor?
No, I can vote on even though I was not there.
You
I
feel
read
like
my,
you're-
You can
I read
still
my
vote.
section.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's unanimous, Linda? Yeah. Okay, next item on the agenda is to approve the April 6, 2022 minutes. Are there any additions, deletions, corrections?
Oh, I was-
Okay, seeing none?
Spelling correction, bi-weekly is B-I.
Oh, okay. Okay, one small edit from Kate. So with that edit incorporated, may I have a motion to approve the April 6 meetings?
So moved.
Okay, Seth
Seconded.
moves, Jim seconds, all in favor? Unanimous, Linda. Okay, for selectmen report, COVID, the COVID positivity rate as of Tuesday, May 10th, mirrors the state numbers somewhat between 11 and 12%, highest number since January. Fortunately, hospitalizations remain low. On Great Island, I continue to research all facets of this property, including funding and possible uses, and meetings are held regularly on this. On the budget, I'm sure Jim will go over it. I just want to thank everyone that worked diligently on it, including all of our department heads, which start this work very early in this season, are reporting to Kate in November, actually. And I want to thank my fellow selectmen, the members of the Board of Finance, the RTM, and the F&B Budget Committee. But I especially want to recognize Kate Bush and Jen Chinetsky for all the work that they do on this.
Thank you, Kate.
The ARPA committee completed its work to determine the allocation of ARPA funds, and I want to take a moment to recognize the members of the committee for their time and consideration on this committee, which was a new endeavor, and there was definitely a lot to learn on an ongoing basis, and people put in a lot of thought and consideration. So I want to recognize John Zagrodzky, who chaired this committee, Frank Huck, Dan Baumgartner, Martha Banks, Kevin Cunningham, and the ex officio members who sometimes are more active than other times, and this time they were all very active. That was Kate Bush, Jen Chernesky, and department heads Ed Gentile, David Knopf, Mark McEwen, and Allie Ramstack. Each year, CCM, along with the Connecticut Division of Emergency Management and Homeland, the Connecticut Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, and the Connecticut Department of Public Health, has a one-day meeting. It's the largest meeting in the state for this type of thing for local public safety officials. Mark McEwen and I participated in this, and I'm appreciative of the state providing this type of learning experience and our department heads taking advantage of it. On town policies, a request was made to hang the pride flag at Town Hall again this year. And for the remainder of this year, the town will continue to hang flags for the same number of flags and for the same period of time. But the Board of Selectmen is working on establishing a flag policy which will go into effect in January of 2023. We've also had numerous requests regarding noise, so we will be looking into addressing that.
Noise related to?
Noise related to all kinds of things. Lawnmowers, snow blowers, leaf blowers, trains, church bells. So
The fire department things, they still bark?
no, I have not received a complaint on that, but that was definitely addressed in the past, and it seems like it was successfully addressed because we haven't heard anything. Oops, see what I did there? We haven't heard anything on that, but
Get ready.
okay, I'll be ready. But we've had a variety of different complaints, so it's definitely something that we have to look at.
I think some other communities, sort of in the general northeast area, have addressed that.
Right. So right now, it's leaf blowers are a big one.
Along those lines, have you ever gotten any calls on noise from the high school for big sporting events?
No.
Okay,
Have you, Kate?
No?
No.
okay. That made it into the newspapers because that application's come back from the Board of Education. And that was the big complaint last year. No one cares about the lights, they care about the sound.
Right. I think they're, on that application, are there
It's not in yet.
restrictions? Okay, so you don't know.
I'll
We'll
give you an
talk about
update.
that.
Okay,
as the hot
perfect.
applicant.
On Fentanyl Awareness, I intended an event to raise awareness on what people think are prescription pills that you can buy on social media, but actually are fentanyl pills, which are much easier and way less expensive to produce. So people think they're buying, an anti-anxiety or, a pain pill, and they're actually not. This is a really big deal. Yesterday was National Fentanyl Awareness Day, so you may have seen some ribbons along the post road in recognition of this. I connected the organizers of the Song for Charlie, which is the group that's looking into this, with the Thriving Youth Task Force, because I think this is something that we as a town should take a look at. And they have a really good marketing campaign, really dedicated towards children and the children that are dying from this, because it takes one pill. This isn't something where you work up a tolerance and you overdose. One pill can kill you. There is no quality control on this substance. So looking to raise awareness on that. I did meet with Senator Chris Murphy, Senior Outreach Assistant, Trayvon Diaz. I explained to him that right now the two areas that the town is focusing on are mental health and flooding, and we discussed grant opportunities and how to best work with Senator Murphy's office for federal support. In 2016, there was a study of Holly Pond that was completed, and the town right now is working with the city of Stanford to address the recommendations that were put forth in this for Holly Pond. I am on the WestCog committee that's tasked with assessing the noise abatement, implementing a quiet zone over on the New Canaan, over by Talmadge Hill, the New Canaan Metro North Railroad line. So on Monday, we interviewed applicants for this project, and I think it's probably from start to finish, it's probably a 2-year study and a project to implement the restrictions that hopefully will help mitigate some of the noise. It's like a half a mile of train with, I believe, 8 stops, 29 horn blasts a day. So it is very intrusive for the people that live over there. Tracy Alston, who was our town liaison with Eversource for many years. Maybe you have spoken with her at some point. She was very responsive to the issues that were brought to her attention, and she has now assumed a new position with Eversource. So I had the pleasure of meeting, actually, a group of us met with the new liaison, Jonathan Fringo, who I believe will continue to do a great job, and I'm looking forward to a continued positive working relationship with Eversource. Continuing with Eversource, the mediation process for Little Brook continues. I don't have an update on that at this moment, but we'll have one very soon. Harbor Master, we have received the official appointment from the governor on our new Harbor Master, who's John Keena, and he will be the Harbor Master till June of 2025. And as I reminded everybody in the last newsletter, please beware and be safe out there for the boating season. We had an unfortunate passing. I received a message from Chief Anderson regarding the passing of Darien Police Sergeant Clifford DeForest at the age of 91. Police Anderson noted that Cliff served the Police Department and the town of Darien with honor and distinction for 26 years, 26 and a half years actually. And many of you had the pleasure of meeting and working with Jamie Gore, our recreation program supervisor. She had a special warmth and enthusiasm that was, I think, very infectious. We're sad to see her go, but we're excited as she takes on her new role as Director of Parks and Recs for the town of Waterbury. So we wish her, Woodbury. So we wish her well there, but we will miss her. Board of Selectmen is continuing. We've had interviews, and we are continuing the final interviews for candidates for the Director of Human Services. Lori Dunn took the department in a very forward direction, and I'm confident that the person that fills this will continue that lead. Lori's last day will be May 19th, and we wish her well. She worked very hard with the town to bring a lot of initiatives forward for us, and we're very appreciative. Finally, Terry Wood participated in her last legislative session, serving as our state rep in Hartford for 7 terms. She will continue to work on behalf of our town until November and will remain active on the OPC. She couldn't make today. She's ill. Last, the Memorial Day Parade will happen, scheduled for May 30th. Excited about that. The Monument and Ceremonies Commission is taking the lead on putting this together again. The marchers will gather at the Goodwife Center and begin marching at 10 o'clock down to the Spring Grove Cemetery. I hope everybody will stay for the ceremony that follows the parade. And the town has requested and received a flyover of C-130 jets. So you can expect to hear the roar of our mighty Air Force at some point. And if you're at that end of the parade, you'll see the pilot tip the wing of the plane in honor to the fallen heroes as he passes the cemetery there. So do not be alarmed by the noise, and look forward to seeing all of you there in your red, white, and blue. That's my report. Thank you. Next, we will ask for Jill McMahon, who is filling in for Duke, to give a report on school.
Okay. We'll report on Board of Ed, but also a brief report on the Oxbridge Building Committee and also the Henley Homes and Royal Building Committee. I'm the vice chair there. Okay. We have set graduation for June 17th. Our seniors are setting off for their internships, and we're looking forward to hearing what they get up to all around town and otherwise. This is, Monica mentioned a few on her end. This is the season for staff resignation, so we're starting to receive some of those. We are very sad to report that, happy for him, but sad to report that Mike Lynch is retiring. There will be big shoes to fill there. But again, we wish him well. And then also our director of nursing, Elisa Kosuchi, is moving south to be with family. And of course, we are all aware of the role that nurses have had, particularly in the schools. So we are so, so grateful to her for her service. Of course, in town as well, I didn't mean to. But from the school perspective, we're really grateful to her for her service and her passion and her commitment. And we wish her as well. We do have concerns about filling positions. There are teacher shortages nationwide in Connecticut and in this region. So we'll be monitoring very closely the number of resignations we receive and our ability to fill positions. On that, similarly, we were able to staff summer school fully, but it actually wasn't easy. We had to work really hard. That program is prepared to go off, summer school and extended school year. It does include some ARP funding of about $50K, so that's just worth knowing that we have some of our students are needing additional wraparound services because of the period of time, of COVID period of time, either because they didn't receive services or because there's a lag. Sometimes you have to go back a little because you haven't received something, so you're even further back, or you need something more comprehensive. So we are seeing more students who need that support, and we are not expecting that to be a one-year phenomenon. We are expecting an increase in the need to support these students probably for a couple of years. On the finance side, in early April, we went to the Board of Finance for an appropriation to escalate a fourth Suburban. We were able to find it, so thank you for that. We found one in Pennsylvania. One of our staff members flew out there to get it and drove it back. We saved $10,000, which we're excited about. But we are now looking for a driver. So that's another area where we're experiencing shortages. Thank you, Steve. That'd be great.
A vehicle with no driver.
It's not back and forth to Pennsylvania that she's talking about.
Yeah, we rented it.
Oh, all right. I gotta return it every night?
So anyway, an example of how the appropriation process worked really well for us, because of course it was a budget item, but in order to get in front of potential supply chain shortages, we got appropriations from you all, so thank you.
Oh,
Or
do we
from
have
you,
that on
sorry.
supply
No, that was
chain?
actually just you guys, just Board of Finance, sorry. Also on the finance side, we have heard from the state that they're changing the funding for excess cost reimbursement. They have actually added about $15 million to the fund, but they've also added an ability to pay factor. So we budgeted about 75%, but our current estimates are that we'll get about 70%, not 75, which puts us at a deficit of about somewhere between 100 and 150K going into next year. And we don't know if the threshold will be the same. So we'll be paying attention to that, and we'll continue to be in communication about that. FYI.
Jill, on that, I know Alan wrote a letter to the governor.
He did.
About that and so forth. Was there any color on, I mean, it just seems like maybe for the public's benefit, as I understand it, they increased the total amount that the state has set aside for these Sierra grants has been $140 million for close to 10 years,
Yeah.
and they tweaked that by adding another $15 million.
Right.
When the real shortfall is $60 million.
Right.
And in connection with doing that, they rank towns like the first 50, next 75,
Right.
and then up to 169 after that. And at least originally in the legislation that I saw, which there's an unfortunate typo in it, they were reducing our reimbursements down to 50% when we were only getting 70 to 80%. So it just seems, was there any color on like how the legislator thought about this in terms of, I mean, it just seems like they were taking, this seems like one of those areas where they're sort of taking away from the neediest, of kind of uses and so forth of these funds?
I think it's a good question. This came up a few years ago, whether or not it's okay to actually assign a wealth factor to children with needs, because they have needs whether or not they're wealthy.
Really?
Yeah. So this is the assignment of a wealth factor. So I think I can't tell you why the choice was made, other than I'm assuming it was for 100% budgetary reasons. And certainly we're grateful to see some additional funding in the pile, but 15 million doesn't come close to the 60. It would what we had written or Alan had written into the state is we'd like to see that number fully funded, up to 60 million, so that you don't have to sort kids by wealth.
I mean, the ECS funding is so extremely wealth weighted.
Yes.
Such that we only receive, I think this year, approximately $476,000. If you think about, and that's basically, other than a little bit of, I think, town aid, Kate, that we get and so
County
forth.
road.
That's we're getting less than $1 million worth of aid, and
Right.
versus I think in calendar year 21 we sent $285 million of income taxes back, and we're getting back about 800,000. It just seems like this was like the last piece of it that was truly needs based,
Correct.
and they're now sort of attacking that, which
Correct.
is going to play out, as I'll talk about next year's budget.
Okay, I agree. On the P&Z side, we did approve our application to come to you guys. There are two things we were asking for. Number one is a change to the zoning regulation to allow us to participate in FCAC championship games. Right now, the zoning regulation reads that it's only town-based groups that can come, which means that you have to put your name in a proverbial hat to say we would be willing to host an FCAC or SEAC championship game before you know whether your team would be would make that part of the playoffs.
So that was outside towns, like
Yes, correct.
New
So,
Canaan could play Ridgefield at our field.
correct. So we're asking for that ability so that we can put our name in the hat and potentially be a host. It would, it wouldn't happen necessarily every year. We could apply every year, but if there are two teams who are, from the northeast side, they're not necessarily going to come down to Darien. But we'd like to have the opportunity.
But Jill, as I understand, this is for teams, to your point, Steve, like if Darien always has a chance to be in the finals.
Right.
So we could host a home game
Right.
Right.
Yes.
I don't know if
Correct.
that's ever allowed. I'm
No,
not
no,
a football guy.
but in terms of like the playoffs and so forth, but then we'd have the ability to host one only if we weren't in it, because you don't want to have hometown.
In the semifinals, you can play at your home stadium.
Yes.
In the finals,
It has to be a third.
Is that FCIAC or state,
Yeah.
or both?
Has to be neutral. It might be the state, that's what I'm talking about. But you're talking about FCX.
Well, both. So
Okay.
FCIAC or SEAC. We would like the ability to host, to be a good neighbor and to participate in the process.
What do we get out of it?
Pardon?
What do we get out of it? The town, what is, and or the school system, what do the schools get out of it?
Well, if it's early enough in the process, then, potentially Darien could be in a semifinal at home. But I think also, we are always relying on other folks to be the host, and we'd like to also participate in that. We feel like it's a partnership, and there isn't a reason for Darien to not do it. It's so infrequent that, we think it's part of being a good town.
From a cost perspective, SEAC covers the costs,
Okay.
and then they also capture the revenue as relates to selling tickets, so it's sort of
Cost neutral.
cost
So it doesn't
neutral.
cost us anything.
Yeah.
I mean, little towns like to have it in their backyard because everyone goes to Dunkin' Donuts and Panera Bread and, has breakfast there after and lunch after.
So Jill, just so I understand, this is an opportunity to put our name in the hat to potentially host teams that are not Darien
Correct.
home teams,
Correct.
and not, with no assurance that it's a luck of the pick, right?
Yes, I think it's a couple of, it's luck of the pick, but it's also where it's located. Again, you're not going to have two towns from all the way
Right.
in the northwest drive all the way to Darien to compete
Right.
if it's not necessary to make them go across the state. But if they're one or two towns from this area where it makes sense.
And when you're submitting this resolution, is there a time frame on it, or is it just in perpetuity?
We did not put any
Okay.
end date.
It wasn't for 5 years or something?
No,
Okay.
correct.
Just
So
wondering.
there's two pieces. One is the change to the zoning regulation, and that's we're basically removing the words town, and we're referring it back to our own internal policy about who can come. The second piece is we are also updating the special permit, so that is ready to go. There was a lot of language in there pertinent to school operations. We've removed that language. The first goal was to restore governance to the proper governmental authorities.
You're talking for lighting.
I'm talking about the special permit for the lights on the stadium field.
Lights and sound.
Well, we removed sound, so that one of the pieces that we removed is sound, because sound is not a zoning issue. So we took out all of the,
I would argue that.
okay, well, we
You
took
should get
sound
an
out.
acoustic guy.
We took sound out of the application for now. We took sound out of the application. You're getting an
I'm just
application
giving you
without sound.
advice.
Okay. We voted on it last night, so you'll receive it the way it is, and we can have an ongoing conversation.
But we haven't received the application yet.
You haven't received it yet, we just voted on it last night.
Okay.
So, we have asked for the lights to be allowed up to 9 o'clock, Monday through Thursday, and until 10 o'clock on Friday and Saturday. And then Sunday would be as needed for championship games. We are not part of that, that's our request. Subsequent to what P&Z approves, the administration will be looking at our internal regulations governing field use, and will determine whether we need to recommend any changes to our field use policy or our internal administrative regulations. So for example, although we're asking for lights to go until 9 o'clock, part of why we want a little bit of a later hour is because right now they go off at 7:30, practice ends and the lights go off at 7:30, which means we have a mass exodus of young athletes, cars in the parking lot, coaches trying to pick up, and we don't think it's particularly safe. There are other times where we understand that there are events where, like handing out the uniforms, which is happening for a portion of time in the dark. So we're just trying to give a little bit of flexibility. We're not looking for increased use necessarily, but we're trying to give some flexibility to the timing.
So Jill, on that, you're not changing practice times or anything like that, correct?
Well-
To take advantage of the additional time?
So when we say Board of Ed, we have a policy that regulates how the people go through the process. So people will continue to go through the process and will be assigned by Sheila Flynn. If it's athletic, it'll be assigned by Sheila Flynn, or if it's to use the facilities. So yes, we are looking for more flexibility. We're not anticipating that there's gonna be a new sports team come and fill the gap necessarily. I think we're pretty maxed out, but, you know, who knows?
Does DJFL want to extend their practice times
That
later?
is not my understanding. Oh, do they want to extend it to later?
Because DJFL practice ends at 7:30.
Sorry.
Well, the lights have to turn,
Go
and,
ahead.
you know, I'm on the DJFL board, but
Yep.
generally the high school teams finish at 6 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
and the lights have to turn off at 7:30 p.m. So if you look at sort of setup and so forth, it really sort of compressed the time that they had. So the idea is that having a little bit more time would allow them more time to set up, have a traditional 2-hour practice, and then take down. Highly doubt it would go all the way to 9 on a regular basis, but
So the answer is yes. DJFL practice would go from 6:30 to 7:30, would switch from 6:30 to 8:30. That's 2 hours.
well,
Well, it is 2 hours now, right?
it's 2 hours now. It's usually from 6 to 7:30. It could be moved from 6 to 8. But again, a lot of it depends on the individual coach. It also would allow, I think if you've seen, you know, what Chris talked about is the ability to kind of spread some of the kids out and stagger the time, have some of the younger kids start earlier and the older kids start later. So,
Joe, is there a lot of pushback from neighbors on this?
There is some pushback from neighbors. There were concerns about the time, in particular noise. We heard a lot about noise. And then we also heard some concerns about the impact to young children, you know, practicing as late as 9 o'clock. Our general opinion on that is that, you know, people who run sports leagues need to take that into account, and we would expect them to as part of their natural course. We're not interested in first graders practicing at 9 o'clock at night. That would
Right.
not be appropriate. Well, I don't think you get anything out of them, having a first grader myself. We barely get anything out of them after 6:30.
Having coached a few, I can think there'd be some parents that would
Correct.
have a word with you.
Correct, as there
They're
should
not
be.
shy.
As they should be,
My
yes.
football practice went to 9 o'clock. I was from
But
8
not-
years old to 12 years old.
Is that
Yeah,
right?
8.
Oh, good for you.
And look
Yeah,
what
but-
happened.
I don't
But
play
regardless-
football anymore.
yeah, but keep in mind, I mean, one of the largest youth sports programs in this town is the YMCA Hoops. I mean, there's more involvement from kids from 3rd grade up through seniors, and they typically have their practices and/or games run up to 10 o'clock in the schools. Now, they try to limit that use, but every once in a while it needs to do that.
On the point of noise, one of the things that we would be looking at with our own internal regulations is noise, the use of the PA systems, and when that would be appropriate and not. So, for example, currently the sports teams do not use PA systems. Well, they don't use them for games, well, most of which are during the day. The youth sports I'm talking about, and they certainly don't use them for practices. But we may need to put some, you know, formality around that just to make sure everybody's clear on what the guidelines are.
I mean, it's going back way too. I mean, I was on the board then. I mean, there was arguments about the band being loud.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
noise is
Sure.
a big factor. So if you missed that
Absolutely.
piece in the application, I would pull the application and redo it.
Okay. Oxford's building committee has experienced some, continues to move forward. They have experienced some supply chain complications. They now have a move-in date for late June. Teachers typically set up their classrooms at the end of the year. Instead, they'll be setting up their classrooms in August, right before the start of the school year. So, you know, there are going to be wiggles in the supply chain, but so far it's being managed, and certainly Mike and Alan and the committee are on it. The Henley Homes Royal Building Committee is busy. This week, we are selecting an architect. We issued an RFP. We got 9 responses. We selected 4 to interview, and 3 came to us Monday night to present charrettes. The committee will meet Friday for a final selection. We're not finished the process, but I will say I really appreciate, I found this additional charrette process to be very valuable for a project of this size, both in terms of kind of a preview of sort of how things might work financially that's a little more detailed than what you hear from architects when they just come to respond to an RFP. And also in terms of refining the conceptual design, we've been able to, I think, see some really interesting and innovative possibilities for how we would design our schools, and I'm grateful that we had the opportunity. We did spend about $10K per architect, so that it cost us about $30,000 to run the charrettes. But, as we think about building committees going forward where, we want to think pretty creatively, I think it's worth considering using this mechanism. So thanks to the Oxbridge Building Committee for debuting that and passing on the wisdom.
Just as FYI, what's a charrettes?
A charrette is, it's kind of like a model. I mean, we didn't get a physical model, but we got more detailed conceptual designs for each of the 3 schools. And then we also got some very high-level finances. And when an architect just came for an RFP, it was pretty high level. So they spent some time studying the sites in more detail. They toured, they took a look at where the stairwells were, they thought about circulation, they thought about classroom placement, the use of outdoor space versus indoor space. And so it's just, they took the opportunity to really study and come back to us with better conceptual designs than when they just quickly came in for an RFP interview.
So
Does that answer?
it's more or less than schematics, you would call?
So this is still conceptual design. So yeah, so we will take kind of the charrettes, sort of mold together what we like. We'll get to an actual conceptual design, and then from there we'll go to schematics.
Okay, thank you.
Julie, you mentioned 4, but you interviewed 3?
We interviewed 4, and then we selected 3
Okay.
to do charrettes.
Okay.
On Friday, we'll select a final architect.
Okay.
In 2 weeks, we'll be interviewing construction managers, and we'll select one by the end of the month or early June. Next week, we'll be focusing on going to each of the boards and next week and the following, and the RTM subcommittees looking for a full appropriation. You all remember from Oxbridge that the state process requires us to submit by June 30th. And before we submit to the state for any potential reimbursement, we have to have received a full appropriation. So although certainly we are earlier in the process than we would be if we were a private entity, we would not go for funding at this stage. We're a public entity. We're interested in funds from the state. So we will be coming to the Board of Selectmen on Monday, the Board of Finance on Tuesday, RTM committees in subsequent days.
We'll see you in June.
And we'll see you on June 6th. And we're looking forward to that. We'll be coming with a review of each of the 3 projects, the concept, the reasons for each, educational and facilities drivers. We'll lay out the high-level finances that we have. We'll be in constant communication because this isn't an escalated quick process. So we want to make sure that we are getting as much of the information as your boards might need as possible to you, because we'll have to all make quick decisions. Okay, that is my update.
I had a question. Just as far as supervision
Yes.
is concerned, in the past, one of the more difficult areas that we've had is supervision to try and keep the costs under control.
Uh-huh.
And how is that being set up? How's that going to work?
Okay. Well, there are multiple layers, but one of the most important ones for that process is the use of a construction manager. So that person will be on the ground supervising construction, making sure that things are being done as they say they're being done. We also will be doing it at the committee level. We have David Martin, who's the Board of Finance representative, and he will have an additional role of being pretty carefully going through and making sure that we are where we want to be. But I think the construction manager is particularly important there.
So the construction manager is essentially clerk of the works?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Any other questions for Joe?
Great job, good luck.
Joe-
We have the best, can I mention one thing? Wasn't the state of Connecticut named the #1 school district in the entire country, or entire state? I mean,
We were named number 1.
Can you please put that on the record?
It was
Okay.
DHS High School, right?
DHS High School is the number 1, yes.
So the Board of Education must be doing a great job.
Absolutely.
And they must have enough funds to get us all the way to number 1 multiple times.
Based on Monday
Yes,
night, I can
yes,
assure you,
yes.
there's more than enough.
Yes. And we'll talk
It's
about
the
that.
right
but-
amount.
Yeah.
you.
Congratulations
Thank
on
you.
being ranked #1 in the state.
Thank you for mentioning it.
That is very, very, very important.
Congratulations to all of us, yeah.
Joe, I have one question. You mentioned the retirement, so
Yes.
is this, when's your peak retirement kind of disclosure time for your teachers, and are you running ahead of schedule?
It starts in February and runs kind of through now, but this is now is the peak.
Right.
And as far as I know, we're running on schedule, but that's a good question. I'll take that back to administration to confirm.
Okay. Any other questions for Jill? No? Okay, we will move on to Jim Paley.
So I guess, obviously the RTM passed on Monday night, the Board of Finance recommended budget, which will show a mill rate increase of about 2.3%. Now that mill rate increase, which will be applied to all residents, right, 2.3%, is a lot lower than the actual increase in spending that we saw if we look across both the operating expenses and the budget expenses. So, I think Seth, you had a comment, this is the largest budget that the RTM has ever approved. I think that's actually been true every year for the last 16 years that I've been elected.
Yes.
It's
Jack
each year's
reminded me
large-
that was a
He'll never
little
say that
gratuitous,
again.
but still.
Yeah, but appreciate your point. I think, and when you look at the growth in operating expenses, because long-term, taxes need to meet the growth in expenditures. This year, how were we able to do it? How were we able to take a much greater than 2.3% increase in expenses when you look at sort of capital operating expenses and turn that into 2.3%? There were really, I would say there are three things that allowed us to sort of defray or to minimize the effect on the taxpayer. The first was ARPA. We had $6.4 million, and out of that, the committee, which I think did a great job, identified about $560,000 of capital expenses that were going to be inside the Board of Selectmen's capital budget, and those were paid for with that. So that came out. Secondly, there are a number of items this year in the budget which we decided to bond. Things like the repair, close to $500,000 for the repair and rebuild of the track at DHS. We again decided, consistent with prior years, to bond approximately $1 million worth of new or completely rehabilitated sidewalks. And we also decided to not fund with tax dollars a few fire trucks that fire apparatus that we know are kind of coming down the pipeline, all of which are in different sort of different points in their sort of development cycle, and to bond those. So bonding was something that will otherwise reduce sort of the taxes that we had to sort of pass along to our residents. And the third piece, which is frankly the biggest piece, were surpluses. There were a number of things in both the Board of Ed budget and the Board of Selectmen budget, both on the revenue side and the cost side on both, where both boards experienced greater revenues. On the Board of Ed side, it was an extra $500,000 of ECR grants, which we already know based on this biannual budget, some of that will be cut. We won't have that next year. And on the Board of Selectmen side, we saw additional revenue from the town clerk in terms of things like home sales, and we saw that in terms of what we now refer to as the net revenue that's generated by the Parks and Rec Committee in terms of their programming activities. So we saw a lot of additional revenue, and on the town side, we saw there were certainly among, like the police force, for instance, there were just some unfilled positions where we had additional revenues or money that we had allocated last year, with the expectation that we could fill those positions, which I think we all parties believe we need to, and that we couldn't fill them, and so we were able to take those surpluses and roll them into this year, and hopefully all of these positions will be able to be held. So we had three things that existed this year, which I don't think will exist next year, that allowed us to take a close to 4% increase in overall expenses and turn that into a 2.3% increase in our mill rate, in the actual taxes that people pay. The other thing I would say is, I mentioned everyone's mill rate is going to go up by about approximately 2.3%, and that means everyone's taxes will go up by approximately 2.3%, and that's because this is not a revaluation year. Next year, we're going to revalue all the properties in town. I think we have 14,000 properties between residential and commercial properties. And the thing that I point out is in a revaluation, not every home value goes up or down by the exact same amount. And we saw this 2 cycles ago in connection with the financial crisis, we saw some areas of the market increasing or decreasing while others were increasing. And so what that does is that shifts the tax burden among our residents. And so as we begin to think about sort of future budgets, we need to not only think about what the absolute level of the budget is and be careful in terms of how we're incurring expenses and how we're developing these budgets, but also where do those increases lie? Because if you look back to, certainly 2 cycles ago, there were instances where certain residents in the sort of very high value homes were experiencing decreases in their taxes, whereas residents in the sort of lower quartile of their home values were experiencing significant increases in their taxes. So I think we, as a set of boards, the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Ed, and the Board of Finance, and the RTM all need to think about just not how much more we're spending, but how is that being shifted around. And I think it just behooves us all to really think carefully about how we develop our budgets and make sure that everything within our budget, we're using those funds to sort of develop the highest valued, most important services to our residents. So we're lucky this year. Next year we have a number of headwinds that we're going to be facing. Likely, we're already seeing a little bit of a slowdown in terms of real estate transactions. We're already seeing some headwinds from the state budget as they affect the sort of education and so forth. So I think we all need to be very careful as we develop our next year's budgets. And on that, I guess I would say, our board will begin to talk about in sort of June and July, developing our views on sort of what guidance should be so that we can deliver it to the boards much earlier than, typically the state of the town. I know on the Board of Ed side that, the minute all the teachers come back to school and so forth and staff sort of re-engaging, that's really when the budget process
Changes the
starts.
mix.
Yeah, and the books are sort of printed or about to go to press by the time, we're all dressed up talking in town hall in the second week of December. So we're going to work to sort of develop guidance and rationale for that guidance before you all the department, both boards and their departments sort of begin to develop guidance. A few things to think about next year. We discussed like sort of the ECR grant that could be a few $100,000. Thankfully, it's not the $500,000 that we originally thought. We have a number of new contracts coming up that'll be part of our next year's budget. Most notably, I know like the teacher's contract is up, and we have a couple on town hall that I think the police contract is coming up.
Yeah.
So this new budget for next year will reflect new contracts. One thing I think we should continue to think about, and we'll do a little bit of work this summer, is shared services. And I think, obviously, we're losing a tremendous asset, I think, with Mike Lynch as head of the facilities, at the schools. But I think it maybe opens up an opportunity for us to think about as a town shared services, and if there are ways as we see sort of turnover and in staff and so forth, if there are ways that we can combine. And I think IT is a great example of where we've really combined IT services, and those fall underneath the school, but I think we save a lot of money by not having 2 full-time IT directors. And then I think, as we think about sort of developing next year's budgets, I think we need to always be thinking about alternative revenues as opposed to just taxes. And that I think all department heads, we would suggest both on the Board of Ed side and, and more so on the Board of Selectmen side, we should constantly be thinking about how we, things like not just taxes, but things like other revenues, whether it be at the town clerk's office, building permits, programming fees inside Parks and Rec, beach passes, dump passes, sort of everything, to be looking at revenues.
When you say that, do you have any kind of target in mind, or do you think you'll be talking about having a target in mind, like in considering that they're not all going to be equal, but like say the dump permits should cover a certain percentage of the cost of running the dump?
Well, so I think when you think about taxation, whether we're charging someone $25 for Is it $25 for a beach permit or 40 now?
I think it's higher than that.
Yeah, it's higher than that.
It's 55.
53.
Okay, well, when we're charging somebody that, I mean, that's basically a tax to use a town service, but that's a user-based tax, because it's effectively a user fee as opposed to a property tax, which is sort of a general tax, right? So I do think we should be looking at a combination of those departments, those areas, whether it be the dump or Parks and Rec or other, like, are we thinking about them on a break-even basis? But I think we should also be thinking about them as a value basis. You know, or are we charging something that's commensurate with the value? But I think we should also be looking at it overall within the budget. I think generally speaking, if you look at our spending, 90 to 95% of our spending comes from property taxes, and the balance comes from, you know, what is a relatively small amount of state aid or other revenues that we receive. So I think we should be looking at, you know, how do we want to think about, you know, that allocation? Again, expenses continue to rise. We see, you know, we obviously see a bunch of, as I mentioned in my State of the Town remarks, there are a few very large developments that we see coming on, two in Norotan Heights and one in Corbin. And $100 million addition to the grant list sounds great. $100 million generates just over $1.2 million of additional revenues.
You're low at $100 million. You're
I'm
about
just using
50% low.
I'm using that as a round number. I'm saying we have 3 large projects coming around, but $100 million, because obviously assessments are not set and everything, but $100 million addition to the grant list only adds $1.2 million. That's less than the increase we saw across the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen in just our healthcare, in our benefits. So I think we really need to think about, you know, other types of revenues, shared services, and I think, you know, one thing which I'd reached out to, you know, to both Duke and Monica about, I do think it behooves us, I think, over the summer to really put together, I think, a little bit of a working group to think about how we approach funding healthcare. You know, right now, it's all sort of, all the risk is sort of laid off on third parties, I guess, except for, I guess there are some instances, right, with dental, don't we?
Dental self-insured.
Yeah, so we should be thinking about, are there other things that we can do to try to lower that? That's our fastest growing cost.
Yeah.
So I think these are some of the things we should look at over the summer. Not necessarily solve at the table this morning here, but I think these are things that it behooves the two boards to get together and figure out if there are ways that we can attack this.
I would agree with you. You and I have been talking about some of the subjects for a few years.
Yeah.
Back to when you were on F&B and I was the chair, and we've been trying to do this, particularly shared services.
Yeah, we
And-
did have a committee that looked at that in the past.
About 6 years ago or
Yeah.
so.
On the healthcare side.
Landscaping, snow
On
plowing.
all shared services, period, but on the healthcare side, the problem with, other than a third party, the town on its own is too small to be self-insured. Our numbers are not reliable. We're too small, too few lives. Add in the Board of Ed as one entity, and we're better, but you're still, at least the guidance we've been given in the past, and that included that time, we are still not really big enough to have a reliable pool of numbers to you know, predictably have level costs or manageable costs. We're still small enough that, you know, one big case makes a big ripple.
So when you say small, I mean head count?
Head count, lives,
You said lives?
lives,
Lives.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why we're in a multi-town consortium. That's how we've been able to manage our costs. It's, well, multi-town, but Board of Ed side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, from the insurer side, you know, when the insurer's N is extremely large, so they can sort of allocate their expenses over large groups of relatively similar employee pools. Here we have, I think, over 550 different employees, 600 employees in the Board of Ed side, and the town side, 150. So it's relatively small, so the risk of self-insuring is one or two sort of
One or two bad, yeah.
outlier cases
Kills you.
can really have an effect. But we also see that having one or two cases in either one of our policies this year sort of led to much higher than expected year-over-year increases. So, like I said, I'm not sure that we're going to develop the answers at this table, but I do think that given the speed at which this area of our budget is increasing, we need to get the smartest, sort of brains in town here across the two different boards together to think about what the art of what's possible.
So going back to your guidance idea, you mentioned June, so to talk a little bit more about what
So I
you're
think
thinking.
in our June meeting, I think our board will begin to think about guidance, and over the summer, when things are a little bit slower and so forth, make sure that we have guidance available for September, when the budgets really begin to get developed. And I think we'll obviously want that guidance to reflect things such as contracts and other.
Will you be looking at, like, borrowing from Jack, core growth or overall growth? Because we know as these redevelopment projects come online, we will need to, we've already converted one part-time in the fire marshal to full-time. We'll need to go to a second one. We expect that we may need to hire an additional full-time sanitarian if the number of restaurants coming on in health or, nail salons and the like are as the health director is expecting. We're likely going to have to go from a part-time sanitarian to a full-time. So kind of out of our control thing. So will you be considering that when giving the guidance that?
Well, yeah, and I think that's an example where we had the benefit over the last couple of years of additional building contracts, building permits, I should say, as these large developments kind of came on board, but we didn't really incur the expenses.
Right.
I think there were
Yeah.
some expenses on the building department side in terms of having some additional sort of inspectors and so forth, but now they're coming on board. We're going to see growth in the grand list, 100, 200, 300, 400 over how many years, right? So we're going to have to incur additional services, but I think, what I look at is what is the actual taxpayer growth in taxes to the taxpayer over the coming years. If the grand list is growing and we have to apply additional services to that, well, then the base is growing and that can support additional expenditures, and that should be, near net neutral. But I think we need to think about. So in that case, it's understandable that a budget may be higher, but there's going to be additional expenses associated, or additional revenues associated with
Yeah.
that.
Well, it's FTEs, enrollment projections, right at the heart of it.
Well, we're a people business. 75% of our expenses are people related.
And you know this, but
Full-time employees, I'm sorry, I got
for the
for everybody.
and certainly you know this, but our next enrollment report it comes in November. So,
Yeah.
And we'll be looking at, this will be the first time we do an additional enrollment report post the census data, post-COVID, and with additional information about a lot of these building projects. So we're really looking forward to that number because that's what we'll be watching.
Joe, when is that?
We'll be presenting it in November.
And you're using the same firm?
I don't know that we are. The gentleman that we were using has changed firms. So we,
Is that Milano McBroom?
Malone McBroom, and he's our particular consultant is now with SLAM.
Okay.
So I don't know that answer.
They're good too.
So what you do is take a 5-year projection and just move it back up into August and in that time frame, basically? Is that-
Well, I think we're going to look at, we'll have opinions in terms of what people believe is an appropriate sort of growth in taxation for our residents. We'll look at sort of where we see the grand list growing. We'll look at what the additionals and the population. We'll look at what the additional services are that we're going to need to incur, or expenses we're going to need to incur to fulfill those services, right?
Chunks.
And then try to develop
Yeah.
guidance inside of that. But I don't, I don't know of any resident that thinks a 5% annual increase in taxes for the next 10 years is what they're expecting. So,
Can I ask you a
Not
couple of questions?
sustainable.
yeah.
With regards to interest rates on bonding, what is that in round figures? Because you said
Well-
you did a lot more bonding this year.
Well,
Is it 2%, 3%, 1%?
so if you look at interest rates, we're probably up 150 basis points over the past 18 months in terms of where we can bond things. So I think our low mark on our bond fee was close to like 1.3, 1.4% in terms of our overall tick.
I don't know.
So you're borrowing less than 2%.
We had been, now rates have sort of crept up and we're into the threes. So, but my point on this year's budget is we were able to, again, bond a number of things in the budget and spread those costs out over
Oh,
the next
yeah,
20
it was a
years,
big
as
deal.
opposed to sort of incurring, and taxing for them today. So that's one of the things that we're able to use this year to turn a, 4-handle expense growth into a 2-handle tax growth.
Right, but market rate interest rates, which is outside of municipal interest rates, they're knocking on 5%. So you're still 50% of what the market is, which is a good thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, listen, the good thing is that Darien has a AAA rating.
Correct.
Which allows us to get near the lowest cost of funds when we choose to borrow. But what we need to be cognizant of, the cost of bonding today is more than the cost of bonding was 2 years ago.
That's fine.
So,
Just for the record, we're still the second or third lowest mill rate in the state in our peer group, absent some of the towns that are way, outside that have basically no services. So it's not like our mill rate is big.
no, I mean, listen, we have the best schools. I think we have some of the best town services. When you look at sort of police, parks, look at everything that we sort of deliver, I think we have some of the best services and we have among the lowest mill rates.
The only one in our peer group that's
And-
lower than us is Greenwich. That's it, period.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you look throughout the state, there are some others that are lower, but we're
Right,
generally
yeah.
in the, bottom single digits.
Yeah, those
Yeah.
towns, their population is
Yeah.
about 10,000 people.
And I think generally, our view is we want to keep it that way. We want to keep top services and we want to keep low taxes.
Building permits, you didn't mention that in your laundry list of stuff. That went up a lot this year. You're still tracking that, right? That should be double what it was in prior years.
It's dropping off.
Okay.
I think, we may see an uptick as Palmer's gets going, but we've gotten the big stuff from federal in Corbin.
Well,
Corbin, we still have stuff to go,
yeah.
but,
Corbin Phase 2 is twice
Yeah.
the size of Corbin Phase 1.
yeah, but it's not, it will drop off. And, maybe next year we'll go up, but then absent any more
right.
redevelopment projects, it's gonna drop back
Yeah,
to normal.
it's going to go, I would say 3 years.
Yeah,
But
but I
it's
think
not,
we've been,
it's not like it's sustainable for a long time.
yeah, we've been using an average number in order to project for the budget to try and stay conservative, because if you miss that number when it's so big, it hurts.
Okay.
I think our sort of run rate has been 1.2-ish.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we've kind of stacked the big projects on. But as I said, these projects are great. They lead with building permits and it's additional revenue. Then you begin to move into the phase where the town needs to provide additional services to inspect, maintain, regulate those. And then it ultimately adds to the grand list, which generates more taxation.
Yeah.
And so forth. And we have 3 very large projects coming on, but as the scale is, the scale is probably among the largest we've seen in town. But what I was trying to do is just sort of frame a number around what $100 million means, right? It's a lot of yellow iron, a lot of construction workers and so forth, but $100 million increase covered not quite 1 year of healthcare increases.
We're still a general fund state, right? That doesn't change. All the stuff goes into, when you talk about building permits and you're talking about beach passes and stuff, that still goes into the general pot, right?
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
GASB, generally accepted accounting principles, that's how it works.
Okay. And then is Board of Education, are they part of?
They're part of the general fund.
Yeah.
They're the
So,
biggest department in the general fund.
so if they rent out the fields at the high school, that money goes into it stays with the Board of
That's-
Education?
That's
That's a net budget.
they
right?
are net to us.
Yeah. So the Board of Ed adds up all their expenses. They subtract revenues that they receive from renting out their facilities. They subtract the expected grant that they get from the state regarding special ed. They now subtract parking passes they charge the students, and they then request the net number to the town. The only number that flows back into the general fund is the ECS grant, which comes to the town, even though it's education-based, it comes to the town general fund, and not through the Board of Ed's net budget. That's about $476,000.
But they account for that in their budget, right?
No,
No,
they don't.
They don't.
They count for the ECR grant,
Right.
kind of $2 to $3 million. They don't account for the ECS grant.
Yeah, the other thing that happens is if there, after the audit, if there was some discrepancy in the ECR, that is, the revision to that is handled through the ECS,
Yeah.
which can be
You're
good or
way
bad.
I'm a real estate guy. You
What-
guys.
Okay, the special ed.
That's okay, that's okay.
Yeah, don't worry about it. But basically, you know what I'm saying, the big number they get, it's a net number. The only thing education related that we get in terms of revenue is that one grant.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, a fraction of your budget.
Yeah.
So much the same way that when the town is building our budget, and we look at all the expenses, and we estimate things like park and rec programming revenues, town permits, building permits, all that, and then we sort of tax for the difference. They do the same thing. They estimate all their revenues and so forth.
But they keep their revenues and it just comes out as
Yes.
a line item. in
Yes.
there. Okay.
Yeah.
That's why I was double checking, because if we're talking about, you know, renting fields and renting, you know, stuff, you know, and creating revenue, that's their revenue that they keep.
But
they ask you for less.
But when you say
Right, but
they keep,
instead of asking us for 150 million, maybe they're asking us for
Agreed.
49.5, right?
Agreed.
but whatever revenues are left over, that all gets swept back at the end of the year to it. And then listen, this year, I think, you know, Jill, I'm sure would correct me, but I think they raised facility fees by, I think, 4% in this budget. So I think they've, you know, continued to look at revenue, so.
And then for argument's sake, if you doubled like the dump fee in the grand scheme of life, what's the amount of money it raises? Does it raise $1 million?
Couple $100,000,
How much?
couple $100,000.
Yeah, so in the grand scheme of a $200 million budget.
But you know,
less than
some of it is a philosophical.
Mhm.
You know, we did try probably 15 years ago to look at the dump and see if we could make it self-supporting.
Understood, yeah, that's what you read at the
And,
beginning.
right, in a community like this, it's a little bit hard, you know, we don't have enough commercial use of the dump. But things like the beach, you know, should we look at all of the expenses related to maintaining and operating the beaches and make the parking permit fee a certain, you know, raise a certain percentage of that, cover, you know, maybe it should cover 25% of all the costs, you know.
And the cost being like cleaning the beaches, cleaning the parking lot, lifeguards.
Exactly, yeah.
I think it kind of
Get
gets
the garbage
into,
cans.
it gets into a little bit of tax theory. When you tax a user fee, you would say that's a very regressive approach to taxation. Because, you know, a person with a $20 million home paying
It's
$50
nothing.
versus you know, it's a very regressive way to tax residents and fund services. When you look at things like a property tax, it's, you know, that's regressive, less regressive. And then you have the income tax, which in the state of Connecticut is very progressive, where it shifts the burden to the upper income. So I think that's also why I think you need to be careful with putting too much revenue or assigning too much revenue to certain kind of user-based fees, because it's a very regressive approach to taxation, so.
And the beaches, even if you don't use the beaches, everybody in town benefits from the
Agreed.
beaches
Yes.
on their property values. So putting 100% of it onto the users is.
Would be too much.
Is
Yeah,
is
yeah,
not.
It's just one way of looking at it,
Yeah.
you know,
I
one
mean,
way
yeah.
of determining how to set the fee.
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
So maybe that's something we have a conversation about. If
Yep.
if the board is thinking about that, how to structure that, we should.
Yeah, and of course, listen.
Because we have 3 private beaches in town. Each country club's got its own private beach, basically.
Right.
You know, there's private clubs that have
Yeah.
pools and beaches.
But it applies to things like the dump, you know,
Agreed.
how much the permit cut. It applies to things like the health, you know, fees. How much of the, you know, how much of the cost of doing a nail salon permit should the fee cover?
Mhm. Okay. No,
Similar to
you
like
guys-
a building project, right? I think
Yeah.
you pay generally 1% of the project value, right? Does that cover the cost of them coming out and
Yeah.
inspecting everything?
You guys do a great job. It's to manage that kind of thing, and I know what you do for a living. You guys do a great job. So do they.
So anyway, not to too long-winded, but we need to just think about, you know, as the upcoming budget here, we should continue to think. I think the earlier we can start, the better, so then that everyone has guidance kind of going into the budgets, rather than, you know, in December when,
Half the budget's already done.
yeah,
Right.
so.
Any other questions for Jim? Okay, we will move on. Steve?
Thank you.
It's almost lunchtime, just keep that in mind.
I'll try to go quick. And
I think
then-
I'm getting squeezed here.
If you ever want to cut me off, you're more than welcome to. What I was just going to do is go through
Change
my,
the order next time.
yeah,
Oh, I'm
exactly.
teasing.
Maybe I'll go first and leave next time, really, but that's okay. Just a typical little laundry list. BMW is the first time that I want to talk about. That's under construction. The car wash is finished. They got additional funding and whatnot to finish the project, so I think that's moving along in the proper order. I don't know when it's going to be finished, but it's going to be a longer process. They have not knocked down the building in the back yet, but they will in short order. I think Oxford School, I drive by there once a week. I think that thing looks fantastic. I know Joe has left, but I'm pretty sure that thing's on target to open September 1st or August 15th, whenever it's supposed to open. What's the next one on my list? The other one that's the newest building in town is 1987 Boston Post Road. That's the new apartment building with the retail space on the Post Road. That's the top of Rings End Road. That's owned by the Caro Group. The 4 market rate apartments are leased and occupied. The affordable unit on top should be rented by the end of this week. One of the retail tenants in the ground floor was already approved by P&Z. I think that is a furniture store. I'm pretty sure it's a furniture store. The second tenant that's going to be going there is still proposed. They have to get a special permit to be able to put a coffee shop in there. So that building's done.
Steve, on that, on the affordable, are they going through, who are they going through to manage that?
I do not remember. I had a handle on that. I don't know what the final decision was, but I was told that the tenant should move in this week or next week. So whoever the tenant was and approved, I'm sure they did it correctly. I'm going to get into that in a second relative to federal, because they still have to do theirs.
Right.
But I'm not sure who's
Yeah, I think
managing it.
federal is running that through internally, but I feel like,
Well, federal's got a consultant out of Boston that does
Right.
theirs too.
but, yeah, okay.
It's only one unit. They can manage it themselves. I think at the end of the day, they want to offload
Right.
it and have somebody else do it.
Right.
But the Vacaros move really quickly, and they probably just want to get it filled and get it done right. And I'm sure Jeremy signed off on it too. The next item is, on my list, is the Montessori School. We talked about that last time. It's the little building over on Tokenique Road. We approved that for 58 kids. They really wanted 72 kids. I'm not sure where that stands in the process. But that was supposed to be, I think they were supposed to buy the building. And I don't know where that stands, if they want to go forward with the 58. They were only approved by the state for 58, and Montessori, quote-unquote, international for 58. But we'll see where that goes forward on an ongoing basis. The next one that's on my list is Great Island. I was very excited to see yesterday, we got a beautiful memo from Kathleen Clark-Bush on May 3rd, asking for the P&Z Commission to do a mandatory referral in accordance with state statutes for municipal improvements and municipal purchases. As everyone may or may not know, there's a state statute called Section 824. Whenever the town buys, sells, improves, does anything great with any piece of property that they either own, don't own, want to buy, acquire, whatever, it has to go to P&Z as one of the initial processes. So last night we had a debate and discussion based upon the Board of Selectmen and Kate's request to see if the acquiring of the town by Great Island was in conformance with the Town Plan of Conservation and Development. At the end of the day, after a short debate, the mandatory referral was approved, signed, sealed, and delivered. It should be on Kate's desk, I think, this morning at some point in time. So we did our part in this piece of the process so far. So the ball is not in our court anymore. It's back in somebody else's court.
Back in ours.
There you go. You're welcome.
Thank
I
you.
think it's a great idea. And the only thing I can say about that, I would assimilate that to Waveney Park, which is a huge asset in town, in the town of Mecana. The next item on my list is we're looking over the, or actually really Architecture Review Board, looking over the sign regulations in town. At one point in time, when COVID happened, there was a lot of stores and retailers and whatnot that put signs outside, said now open, we're back in business, please come in and do that. We have very strict sign regulations in town, so we're trying to clean up that list, and the people internally in P&Z in the department are looking at those items. Next, we have the Affordable Housing Plan that is due in July, I think at the end of July. At this point in time, we have the draft for the Affordable Housing Plan ready to go. Dave Keating is our outside consultant working on it with the P&Z staff. I've seen copies of the report. We've debated it in public hearings, a bunch of different items on a section-by-section basis. I think we will be on time with that Affordable Housing Plan with the state. We may or may not, because it has to get done. There's other towns in our area, like Norwalk. They've already said we're not going to do ours on time for whatever reason. But I think we'll be in good shape. It's not, just for everyone's edification, it's not a report that's extensive as a town plan and conservation development. We did one, it's like 15 years ago, I think, by 2 or 3 Board of Selectmen ago. It's just, it lays out everything. There's not a lot of fluff to it, but I can tell you that Westcott did do their piece of their thing, and there's a lot of statistics in that, which includes our own town.
Steve, on Norwalk, they said they were not going to get this in on time a long time ago. Did the state have an opt-out or an extension automatically for?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
But you know, sometimes with these kind of things, they may give you a deadline, but there's no actual penalty
Correct, there's no teeth to
to the deadline, you know, if you miss it.
it. Yeah, there's no teeth to it.
I
I mean, from the planning department, planning zoning department, that department and the commission backs them up, they don't ever want to be late on anything. You know, so it's not like they're, you know, throwing their flag up and saying we're not going to do it. I mean, we've been working on it for over a year now. There's a consultant that's outside consultant that's working on it for us, who's Dave Keating, who's a former staff person in town. So we have really no intentions to be late, but at the end of the day, we just want to get it right, and I'm pretty sure it's going to go to the first selectman as an ex officio member at least before anything gets put out there in the public. It's already in the public because it's a public document, but anything like this before it gets finalized.
And you've been updating on the website the different phases,
Yeah.
which is terrific
Yeah,
for
I mean,
people that want to take a
yeah.
look.
P&Z is totally transparent with everything.
Right.
They post more stuff to the website than anybody. And I'm still an email guy, but that's just me.
Steve, are all your meetings back to sort of full in person now?
We are 100% full in person. We actually did have to cancel 2 meetings because various people got sick and were out, and we did not have a quorum. So I think we are going to have one meeting on a virtual basis between now and forever. But we are adding a couple meetings, but we are 100% in person. And we had a nice meeting last night. Everybody is happy as a clam to be back in person.
That's great. And when you do virtual, is it really hybrid or is it pure virtual?
No, we're pure virtual. We tried the hybrid once in the peak of the pandemic. We use these 2 new things now. We didn't use them last night, but we have not even tried the hybrid thing.
Okay.
We did a hybrid first meeting of this month. Mike Burke was not able to be here physically.
Right, I did
So,
see that, yeah.
we had a camera here so that people coming through the Zoom link could see the board and see who was speaking. And, you know, we had the Zoom meeting on the monitors, and it worked pretty well.
Yeah, I meant to meet with Kate a while about how the hybrid works and Jim Cameron, and we've yet to schedule that. But, I mean, if someone wants to present from out of town versus flying in from California to give us a presentation, you know, I really don't have a huge problem with that. But I would
Yeah.
rather have, if you live across the street on Rancho Road, I'd rather have you come in here than sitting in your house. But we'll see. We don't have a policy on it.
Got it.
Okay. The next item on my list is lights and sound at the high school. We approved that proposal about 5 years ago. It was in the papers again, saying that, you know, as part of that as part of that resolution, we call these things that are back called the green sheets. The prior superintendent had a third-party agreement with some neighbors on that had a 5-year sunset. The 5-year sunset is passed. So we're going to look at that document again, and it sounds like the Board of Education has a plan to do that. So when that hits our office, we'll eventually take a look at it. I bet you Dallas and Donuts, we're going to want to have that buttoned up before the fall.
Because they voted on it last night, so I think you'll, I don't know when you'll get it, but.
Yeah, I mean, I got to believe that someone who's setting football games and practices and whatnot wants to know that before September 1st. If they're
Most
going to be
likely.
home away or at night. The next 3 items I was going to go into is what we all call the big 3 projects, which is Corbin, Federal, and Palmer's. There's pretty much good news on all those items. Started with Corbin first. The number 1 building that's under construction is effectively called the Tibbetts Building. That is on the corner of Corbin Drive and Old Kings Highway South. The building has 4 apartments, 2 retail stores. The 2 of the 4 apartments are leased. The tenants should be in place by October 1st. The 2 retail tenants, one is going to be Bobbles and one's going to be the dry cleaners, which are moving over to the other building. So as soon as their building's ready, those 2 tenants will move over. They're about 70% done with the sewer main replacement on Corbin Drive. They hit some rock in that project, which puts them back a little bit of time. They knew the rock was there, so they knew it in advance. But I think they're going good. If you do watch social media at all, they recently posted a picture of the new Bank of America building on the corner, which is the old gas station. We saw artist runnings in advance, but it didn't really have signage on it. The latest artist running I saw was absolutely beautiful. That building, I think, is going to be the next one. There was another not really groundbreaker, steel putting up where they had an event 2 weeks ago or a week ago where they invited a whole bunch of people over for a pizza truck day. And I think Monica was there because I saw her picture.
And they invited town hall people that have been, departments that have been involved in that, so it was really nice.
Yeah, that's a great thing. So they put up more steel for that building. That should be delivered, I think, during the winter or later than that. Then across the street, which we effectively call Phase 2, the demo of Phase 2 should start in the fall of 2022. The big move on that one is the post office. The post office is moving. I don't know if it was ever announced, but it hasn't made it to us, but I'm told that the post office is moving to Goodwife Shopping Center. So we're not losing a post office. We're going to move it from where it is now to Goodwives. It'll still be in the center of town. That's pretty much the retail space for Phase 1 is fully leased, and there's a couple spaces left in Phase 2 on the commercial side that's available. The developer of that told me that they may make some more announcements soon on whether the tenants go in there, but they did come back to P&Z about a month ago, I think, to add more restaurants. There's a mix in all of our projects of restaurants versus retail versus office. They wanted to see if they could up the percentage of restaurants there and still be in conformance with the plan. And we basically, in the general meeting, approved, I'm going to say 80% of they had 10 things on their list. I think we approved 8 out of 10 right off the bat. A couple of other items they had to come back with some more things, but it's really just tweaks to a bigger plan. The next one is Federal. Their front buildings, all the buildings are topped off and finished. They're not, all the windows are in on most of them. The first building, which I call, they call it building R2 or something like that. That's the building that's in the back that fronts along West Avenue. That building has 58 apartments, and of those 58 apartments, 8 of them are affordable. There's about 25% pre-leased on the market rate apartments. There are most of them are 2 bedrooms, and the rest are 1 bedrooms. I asked them to keep us abreast of what's going on relative to the kids in there. I'm told that most of the people there are quote unquote empty nesters, people that live in Darien, some divorcees, but I'm told that there's only 1 child of the apartments that are leased already, and that child goes to a private school. So in the first 25% of the building, of the project, we have 1 kid. And they're not even gonna be in the school district.
Steve, you mentioned 8 out of 58. Is that to target the 14%?
There's a total of 16. It is about 14%. There's a little tweak in there. Our regulation at the time was 12%. They are higher than the 12% because of the way the bonuses work. But yeah, there's of the 122 apartments, there's 8 of them are affordable. I'm sorry, there's 16 affordable, 8 in each building.
Okay.
Of the 2 buildings. The second building is 64 units. That building should be ready to go in February, I think. I think it's February. They're gonna start the leasing of that in February of 2023.
Steve, sorry, on the 58-8, are 25% of the 8 also pre-leased?
That's my next sentence.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay, that's quite all right. They're gonna they have an affordable housing plan that was drafted for that project. Their outside consultant is a person out of Boston that does the affordable housing plan for, I think, federal and nationally. They're gonna do a lottery for those 8 apartments. I think the final documentation is either in town hall or in town council. I know town council already signed off on their affordable housing plan. I don't know if it was recorded on the land records yet, but I'm told that it was. There was one other tweak before they're gonna launch the lottery for those units. The lottery was what I was talking about earlier relative to the Vaccaro building at 1987. I don't think they had to do a lottery for theirs because it was only 1 unit. Federal on their project, they have 16 in total, so they are going to do a lottery, and that's where it comes up now. And a lot of the big projects in Stanford, at the beginning, when there was some new affordable housing done in Stanford, they did lotteries. Now, as the other project going up in the South End, they don't really do lotteries anymore. But this is the first biggest one in Darien in a long time. So they are going to do a lottery for those. Okay? I think I got all that. Relative to Palmer's, again, we approved that one a few weeks ago with regards to their final plan. They changed the numbers around a little bit. That's supposed to be 60 units there of apartments, and then the Goddard School got approved on the corner. I don't really have an update relative to that one, but I assume they're moving forward. I don't really have it directly. Maybe Monica knows more about that one than I do, but they should move forward. The one thing they do have to do, which was in our resolution, that whole project has to be wrapped in wind screening. Where right now only one side is wrapped in windscreening as part of the resolution, which is active today. It should be wrapped on the West Avenue side. No, I'm sorry, the Hollow Tree Ridge Road side, and also the side that faces the store. So I know Jeremy was following up on that item.
How much time do they have to do the complete?
To complete the whole project,
No,
well,
the wrapping.
it should be done now.
Oh, right,
Yeah.
okay. So
It should have been
Jeremy-
done yesterday.
So Jeremy has sent something out.
Yeah, but it should be done yesterday. That was the big item, not a big item, it was an item that was included inside our approval of the property. Where are we? The next one, last night we closed a hearing on a property which is, I always forget the address, but it's the old HSBC Bank Building up on the Post Road, which is out by exit 13. There was a proposal to put a company in there called Bird Code, which is a high-end chicken restaurant that has another location up in West Hartford. We had the traffic engineers look at it, the police department look at it, the architects look at it. We had a sound consultant came in and looked at it. The tie and bond from the underground for the sewer storm management system looked at it. There was a parking expert looked at it. All those various third-party people basically signed off on it last night. So we closed the hearing last night. We will debate that application in probably a couple weeks and draft a resolution on that. That takes another building that's been vacant for about 3 years. Potentially back into an occupied state. The other item that came up last night was the Scouts and the Memorial Trust, where it's over on Heights, West Avenue. They bought a building called 70 Old Kings Highway North, which was way back when I remember it was the Board of Realtors office building. It was vacant for probably, again, 3 years on the market for sale. They ended up buying it, and they're gonna really use it for administrative back office purposes. They had to come to P&Z last night for a special permit if they want to hold meetings in there. They also have an idea to sell, they call it a little bit of a retail store or retail operation. It's about 175 square foot room, where if you lose your scarf, and as a parent, you have to go get your son another scarf or your daughter another scarf. Right now, you have to drive up to Milford. That's where their little retail store is for our district. They want to be able to have those scarves available in our town at this building, and that it's not a permitted use, so that's why we have to have it there. They now have pivoted away from their annual tag sale. They do what they call live auctions on an auction site. So if you donate stuff like your old pool equipment or your old lawnmower, they do a live auction and take pictures of it. There's a garage at that building, and then they auction the thing off. And so they want to be able to have people be able to come pick up and drop off the quote-unquote auction items there. I don't know if they're going to do an auction again. I mean,
They just finished one,
a tag sale?
well, the online auction.
Okay.
I just bid on them.
Did you bid on some?
Of course.
Bid on a boat?
No,
There you go. Buy
a few
some
things
gig.
are lost, but
There you go.
Steve, is the drop-off and pickup at that building, or is it on West?
They want it to be at that building. It has to get approved for large items.
Right.
I think if you drop off small items,
Right.
it doesn't matter, but the example that I used last night was my lawnmower. If I want to drop off my lawnmower, their idea is for me to drop it off there, put it in the garage that's in the back of that building, take a picture of it, and they sell it like 2 days later.
Okay.
I don't really know how it works, but that's the concept they have for that location. What's next? 3 parklands. We approved 3 parklands as a 60-unit apartment building. I'm going to say again about a month ago. It was again on the front page of the papers. The approval that we provided was 60 total units, of which of those were 8 affordable units. That approval was appealed by the neighbors. The developer made the front page of the papers again yesterday. They have an alternate plan that they might put forth, which would be, instead of a 3-story, 16-unit building, it would be a 5-story up to 90 units there. And that would fall under the 830G statute, where the zoning code basically gets pushed aside because it's an affordable housing development. That application has not been filed with the P&C department. And I don't know the status of it, but if you ever saw the Darien Times, on the front page of Darien Times, the artist rendering of the project.
So they came back and made an offer that's worse.
No, affordable housing project should not worse. It's
8
larger.
stories versus 3?
5.
It's
Or
not
5
worse.
stories versus 3?
Yeah, it's-
Sounds
More dense.
like
More
more
dense.
dense. Thank you
Yeah,
very much.
there you go. Yeah. It's a different plan. It's any parcel in town has the ability to have an 830G application put on it if it meets certain criteria, as being on a public road, being served by public water and sewer. And most of it, in our, I think, regulations, we wanted to have a walking distance from, public transit, which is the post road. They have every right, if they do file that, they have every right to file it. And we'll review it with all the other applications that we see. That's
You
that.
hear my concerns.
Oh, 100%. I hear
Because I
everybody's
don't have to
concerns.
look very far from Norotan Heights to see where we can go, okay?
Yeah,
We got the transit-oriented development smoking around up in Hartford. And what we do here we just don't want it influencing what goes on in the future, that's all.
Yeah, there was that, if you remember, there was a draft proposal to put more dense transit-oriented development as of right zoning in the town of Darien. I testified on behalf of the town, on behalf of myself, that we'd rather have local control over our zoning. That bill, in and of itself, never made it out of committee.
Right.
So
Nice
we're-
going.
Thank you,
I
sir.
also submitted for that.
Yes, you submitted a very nice letter. I think I read your letter before I gave my public testimony. Thank you. 77 Leroy, which is an 830G project, which is also known as Pemberton 16. They have an application that was to lift the age restriction that the judge put on there. I recused myself from that application. That still is in draft. And the public hearing's still open because it keeps getting extended. We were supposed to debate it again last night, or the commission was supposed to debate it again last night, but the applicant did not come to the meeting. I recused myself because that property is on the market for sale, and it's being sold, it's being marketed by my firm, so I stayed out of it for optical purposes. The corner of West and Norotan Avenue, do you have any update on that, Monica? The construction that's supposed to happen there, or Kate, I guess? It's the 2 gas stations and the widening of the road.
DPW reported yesterday that starting in June.
Okay, okay. The only thing I wanted to, that's pretty much me. The only thing I wanted to add on that was when we approved all of these 3 quote-unquote big projects, there was a big concern that we have construction all going on on the entire town. The whole town was going to be under construction, including this project. I've never heard one complaint from anybody that there's been a traffic issue relative to any of these construction projects, and they're kind of all hitting at the same time. And that was a big one at the same thing, so I think we're in good shape on that.
And Steve, I know there was some discussion around whether these projects would make it more difficult for kids to walk to school. I mean, I haven't seen any changes or shutting down of sidewalks anywhere down around Norotan Heights.
There is 2 more pieces before I do sign off. The answer to that is I've never heard anything either. There's sidewalks on West Avenue that goes from the gas station we just talked about, which is now a mobile gas station that goes all the way down to Hollow Tree Ridge Road, is basically done. There's 2 pieces that Federal has not finished in the middle of it, which is where the culvert comes from. It's the big main culvert that comes from way up in New Canaan, goes through McGuan Field, goes underneath all the Norotan Heights. That's the one section that's not done. I asked them when I toured it 2 weeks ago when they're going to finish that thing, so we'll open up that entire sidewalk. The town graciously did, or fantastically did, a new sidewalk on the other side of the street on West Avenue. Federal did their sidewalk on their side of the street, so the sidewalks are all open. As part of the Palmer Federal item, the sidewalk on the other side of Heights Road is supposed to be done. That was another big piece of the application for both of those projects. We want continuous sidewalks to go from Norotan Avenue all the way to Hollow Tree Ridge Road. And the reason why I'm just focusing on that is because, to me, the biggest walkers in town are the teenage kids or the middle school kids that come out of the middle school. Those guys are always walking around after school. And I think the town did a great job with all those sidewalks. And then the other piece was, I call it a flyover bridge that goes from pretty much McGuan Field into the Federal project, which is on the McGuan Field exit on West Avenue. There's a bridge, there's going to be a staircase that goes up and over the Federal project to the Walgreens. I've asked them to open that staircase as soon as possible, so people can walk from McGuan Field, go over the project into there, and then there's going to be a new ice cream storm in there that was approved by Linda. That was approved by Linda, so that's another sidewalk that's going to be open too. So we're kind of excited about that. With regards to with grand lists and mill rates and whatnot, I just did a little bit of research and speak to Tony Homicki all the time with regards to stuff in town, stuff outside of town. The largest taxpayer today still in the town of Darien is the Avalon project. Their assessed value is somewhere in approximate to $47 million, which is about $350,000 per dwelling unit, and they generate about $750,000 in taxes. As a couple little data points, in October of 2020, the assessed value on the Federal project was $17 million. In the last year, it doubled, and it went to about $37.8 million. For the grand list for 2022, which is going to be October 1st, it should double again from 37 and double again to a new number. That project is supposed to come online August 15th, September 1st, and the grand list gets certified on October 1st. So that will be inside the project. So that will be the newest, largest assessed property in the town of Darien. And you are 100% correct. If you do the math, if it's $100 million, it's about 1.2 million. If it's about 1.2 million in taxes. So that is, I think, my report.
Steve, really briefly, the building over by Goodwives, it was Bank of America maybe?
The little one.
The little building that is, I think, 22 units going up there?
Which one?
Across Goodwives.
Oh, okay,
Shopping
7 Cedric, yes.
Right. So
Okay.
is that still on?
That we did not, that hearing was, we have all the information on it. We have not opened up the public hearing, but we have not had any testimony on that project at all.
Okay.
So it's still in the works. The building design is, I think it's a 3-story building up on stilts, because you have to lift it out of the flood zone. And I think you're right, 22 units, which is pretty much 11 on 2 floors.
And they're putting the parking underneath,
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Which is, you'll see buildings that are like that. We only have 77 Leroy's like that, where the building's up on stilts, and the parking is underneath. That's the same item here, and that's how they're getting away in the flood zone. But the zoning code, from my recollection, it has to have ground floor retail space. I don't think that there is any ground floor retail space in there. You are allowed to have a lobby in the flood zone, and the elevator obviously will get onto the ground floor, so they have to be able to mitigate that too.
And they must have to do some pretty serious stormwater management there, right?
Yeah, they'll have to do something. I mean, you were there last year when the big storm hit, and there was 4 feet of water inside that bank branch.
Okay. Any other questions for Steve? Okay, thanks, Steve.
You're welcome.
Seth?
The RTM met face-to-face for the town budget and approved the town budget on Monday night. So we're very happy about that. Putting 100 people in a room face-to-face is different than putting 13 or 14 or 20 or so. So it took a lot of logistical effort to get it, and also to make sure we've got the membership happy and smiling and ready to come in and meet face-to-face. I think they were pleased at seeing each other again after 2 years. The Rules Committee voted to have the meeting face-to-face, and we did 2 things in the Rules Committee. Spaced out, we used the entire lower floor of the auditorium to allow the RTM to spread out, so that they could provide space for each other, feel comfort from that standpoint. We added a mask requirement, I think for the same reason, just to have people feel comfortable and to make sure that we got maximum attendance that we could get. 70% of the RTM was there with masks. So we're very pleased with that, and hopefully we'll continue meeting face-to-face, barring some COVID. The other thing that we're working on, and we have to thank Kate. Kate has helped us a lot in getting the room organized and in helping us with ARPA, and we're working on trying to put together a hybrid capability. We don't have it now in the auditorium, but we're working on it. The hybrid idea is simply to allow members who are traveling, sick, some other extenuating circumstance, allow them to participate in the meeting, but still have the meetings face-to-face, basically. I want to thank also, in organizing this thing, Lois Schneider. Lois is the vice chair of the Rules Committee, but also is the head of the Technology Committee. Technology has a broad definition from the Rules Committee. It's just about any little detailed job that needs to get done. She and her team seem to get it done. She and Mike Wheeler, they do a great job. So I just want to thank them and thank Jim Cameron for getting us up on TV.
Is Mark Adeletta still on that committee? IT.
Yes, and Mark Adeletta as well, yeah. Mark Adeletta is also on the technology committee, and they've been very, very busy. And they're keeping Kate busy. So, thank you. The selectmen's operating budget was $48.4 million. Education operating budget was $110.6 million. Total appropriation of the general fund was $159 million. Mill rate at 17.23, and that's a 2.3% increase, as Jim mentioned. So in June, we'll be voting to fund HHR, Holmes, Finley, and Royal. Finally, it's a two-step process. We'll do the second step in June, and that will close out pretty much. We don't meet during the summer in general. We can, but we generally don't, and we'll meet again in September. That's it.
Do you have a vote number on, was it unanimous on the budget?
Not quite. I think there were a few abstentions, 2 or 3 abstentions, but there were 70 there, and
70% or?
yeah, 70 people.
70 out of
71.
70%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we have the 2 vacancies now, right? Just, we
Yeah.
got 5 and 6 as one in each?
Right. And
Did
we're
anybody-
we'll fill them.
Did anybody vote against the budget? You said there were abstentions.
Not that I recall, because we
Yeah.
would have gone to a roll call vote. We have to roll call if it's a no.
And
And everybody's aware of it.
And so I didn't see any motions for amendments or anything
No,
like
no.
that? Like, so,
No, not at all.
that's great. I need to excuse
I
myself.
have to also thank Jack Davis. Jack Davis did an incredible job distilling the budget so it was understandable to the RTM, and putting up a really fine presentation of how it was all assembled. In extensive consultation, I think, with Mr. Palin.
Did a great job.
We really appreciate all the work he did. It was a lot. That's it.
Okay. If there are no other comments, may I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn?
Okay.
Second.
Okay, so seconds, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, 79.
Thanks.